Welcome to the Qigong Summit, Al. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Robert. Good to be here.
So I thought I've been asking all the speakers and experts on this summit a little bit about their background and how they got into, in your case, Feldenkrais.
Well, I started learning about the Feldenkrais method when I was in my NLP training back in the early mid-'80s. We had a couple of Feldenkrais practitioners taking the NLP trainings. So that was my first introduction to it. I didn't really understand it at the time. And one of those gentlemen who was taking the training, Jack Heggie, I later saw him for private lessons. In my early 30s, I had developed some severe back pain. I was having back spasms, difficulty in breathing. And so, like many people, I found my way to the method because I was in pain. I was having difficulties. And over the course of about 5 to 7 private lessons with him, I had remarkable change. And I remember after one lesson, I went out to my truck and I had to change my seat, had to change my rearview mirrors because my organization had changed in such a dramatic way that my truck didn't fit me anymore. I had to adjust the truck. And I didn't send it, I never put it back. I never readjusted the mirrors, I never changed the seat. And so that was a nice metric for how change can take place with the Feldenkrais method, because it's not a conscious process. It's not something you have to practice consciously. It just happens automatically, and you get to keep the change. So that was how I got into it initially. What made me want to become a practitioner was, after working with Jack in private lessons, I was publishing audio programs at the time, and I still am. And I suggested to him that we put some of this work on audio. So we published a number of audio programs: Healthy Back, Total Body Vision, Total Body Golf, Running with the Whole Body, all of which are available on my site, achievingexcellence.com. And so that was intriguing. And then he invited me to videotape a workshop he was doing for practitioners, which he called the Primary Forms of Functional Integration. And functional integration is the private hands-on work, the one-on-one lessons. And so what had seemed to me, receiving a lesson as being a lot of, random poking, pushing, and pulling, I saw was actually a really well-organized, well-thought-out method of movements. And I could see that after we worked with somebody, that they sat differently, they moved differently. And it's just like, it blew my mind. And I had the opportunity to play a little bit. I have a friend in the workshop, and he's like, "Come on over, Al." So he showed me some things, and I got to do some things. And I remember I went home that night, and I said to my wife, "Sarah, get on the floor, let me try this with you." So I moved her around a little bit, and she felt better. And so pretty much the next month, anybody I ran into, I was like, "Hey, get on the floor, let me try this with you." And so I moved them around a little bit, and most everybody had a positive reaction to it. And so that was it. That was the tipping point. That was what got me interested in joining a training. And so it's like the universe just kind of organized itself to get me in there. My wife said, "You got to go." My parents said, "I'll have to pay for it." There's a friend of mine who lived 2 blocks from the training center. He said, "Yeah, come stay in my basement." And it was great. So for the next 4 years, I had a place to stay. I had a lot of support. I got a really excellent training with Elizabeth Behringer and Feldenkrais Resources. And never looked back. It was a fundamental, life-changing experience, and it's one for which I'll be forever grateful.
Interesting what you were saying, that it's not something you do consciously. Tell us a little more, because presumably in a class, as opposed to one-on-one, you're doing it yourself.
Right.
Whereas if you're in a one-to-one, somebody else is helping you do the movement.
Yes, let me talk about that.
Yeah.
So in both cases, we're working with your habits. We're working with your preferred ways of moving and organizing yourself, which are your habits that facilitate your abilities, and they're the ones that facilitate your problems. And so we want to change those habits. And in a private lesson, I'm moving you, and I can sense your habits, and I can interact with them, and I can modify them. And it's like, you're in your box, I'm on the outside of your box, and changing it. So you're doing a class, which we call awareness through movement. I'm guiding you through a series of movements combined with awarenesses. I'm asking you to try out some of these often strange and unusual combinations of movements.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you kind of expand your habits, you expand your box from the inside out. Is kind of a way of looking at that.
Okay.
But you don't have to, like, I'm not giving you, do A, B, C, and D and go practice this. We don't do the same routine every time. Each lesson is different. Each lesson addresses a different aspect of functioning and improves a different ability. And so we kind of bring those habits forward in a conscious awareness a little bit. We work with them. We interact with them. We let them go outside conscious awareness. So they go back to second nature, so you don't have to practice or think about it. They're there spontaneously. The changes are spontaneous for you. It's one of the beauties of the Feldenkrais work.
Do you work with people who have specific problems, and supposing they have a shoulder problem or a hip problem, would you look at that specifically through a series of movements, or would you work holistically through the whole body still?
I would work holistically, and I would also work to target those areas depending on how they present. So if I'm working with somebody in a private lesson, then I may watch them walk, sit and talk to them, ask them to do some movements. I get them on the table, I start moving them, and I can start to feel how their personal organization is influencing this issue they're having.
Yeah.
And depending on how I sense that and how they're responding to it, I may work with it more directly. I may work with it very indirectly. I may work with everything else all the way around it, so everything else improves, and then this area that is problematic improves. So it really depends on the person. I've had so much experience with the work and so many people and given thousands of lessons that it really is nuanced by the person when I work with them privately.
We best kind of come back a little bit to understand a little bit more about the origins of the Feldenkrais method.
It was originated by Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais, and he was an Israeli physicist, martial artist, and mechanical engineer. And his background from the early ages as a young man was in martial arts and labor. He was a laborer and a martial artist, and he immigrated from Russia to Palestine at the age of 14, and he put himself through school, but martial arts was a significant part of his development in his adolescence and in his youth.
Yeah.
And he went on to write 5 books on martial arts. And even in his youth, so his writings, he's approaching things in a unique way. So he's studying reactions in people. So I've heard this story where he'd have a friend with a camera, and they startle another friend coming out of a doorway, and he gets a picture of how the guy responds. He goes, well, how do you turn that into a technique, a defense technique? How do you take a person's second nature way of responding to something and modify it to be something better, right? It sounds like something I just described earlier, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? So even as a young man, you could see the thinking. Yeah. And so he's very interested in the mind and the body. He, in his late teens, early 20s, he translated a book of Emile Coué's. You know Emile Coué? Mm-hmm. He was an early pioneer in hypnosis and autosuggestion. Yeah. And so he translated that into Hebrew and added a couple of chapters relating to somatic applications, which I've republished as Thinking and Doing.
Right.
Also available on my website. So he goes on to become a judo master. When he goes to France, he meets Kano. He's one of the first Westerners to get a black belt in judo. And you can see in his writings and his thinking that it lays a very solid foundation in his origins of movement. And you get to his last martial arts book, Higher Judo, and you can see in this book, if you go through the first 2 chapters and you change the word judo for Feldenkrais method, they are synonymous at this time. He wrote that book at the same time he was writing Body and Mature Behavior. There's overlap at this point in time. One is giving birth to the other.
Right.
Changing from a fighting defense art into a healing, learning system.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. How
does it differ from the Alexander technique? Because with the Alexander technique, you have a you go and somebody assists you in understanding the technique through very simple movements and prompting. How does that differ from the Feldenkrais?
Well, I'm not an expert on the Alexander method. My understanding is they work a lot through the head and the neck to facilitate better posture.
Yeah.
I think the Feldenkrais method has a much broader range of movements, much broader range of functions with which it works.
Yeah.
In so many ways. I mean, Feldenkrais, he left us with a legacy of literally thousands of lessons to work with and study.
Right.
And they're all different. They all address a different aspect of functioning and a different aspect of using the mind to interact with yourself to improve your abilities and your functioning. So I think it's a much broader, more in-depth system, and no offense to the Alexander technique people.
I'm really interested to know a little bit about the way in Feldenkrais the mind and the body work together.
Yeah, it is one of my favorite aspects of the work, because it is not just about movement.
Yeah.
It is about how you use your mind to interact with your brain and your nervous system to change your movement, and how your movement can change your nervous system and your mind and your brain.
Right.
It's fascinating, a trio of players.
Yeah.
In awareness through movement, we work a lot. You're more actively aware with your mind, because I'm guiding you through to do a particular movement and to sense what you're doing. I may have you attend to this part of yourself, that part of yourself, or notice this or that, and make variations that really challenge the mind and challenge yourself in thinking. And this is, really significant part of the work. Now, the lessons themselves, if you just went through and just read a lesson, like you go to the book Awareness Through Movement, you just read a lesson, you don't do any of the awareness stuff, you'll still benefit from it.
Mm.
If you add the aspect of working with the mind, bring the mind into it, you get a whole another level of the work. It goes in much, much more deeply. And I think that was one of the other aspects of Moshe's brilliance, was bringing those systems together like that.
And so your body awareness increases. So beyond that, where does that help in terms of changing your habits?
Well, Feldenkrais often said that we move in accordance with our self-image. And if there are parts of our self-image that are absent from us, if we're not aware of them, if we don't sense them, they're not going to participate in our movement.
Right.
Now, in a way, all Feldenkrais lessons are addressing this idea that he had of improving the self-image, to be more fully aware of yourself, more fully aware of your movements and your sensations, so that all of you can participate more equally in the movements. And when that happens, then your movements become more graceful, they become lighter, easier, even more powerful by using less effort.
Right.
So it resolves, conflicts that you may have had, which may have been emotional, psychological, or just, from two habits not working together when you're trying to achieve a certain goal.
Yeah.
So that's fundamental idea. And in a way, all Feldenkrais lessons are addressing that through different aspects of functioning and ability.
Yeah. It's intriguing, isn't it, that we grow up right from the adult, and we are, through our experience, we're a lot of conditioning is imposed on us from the outside that's not necessarily our own, but it's our interpretation, I guess, in the moment, and that's how we kind of build an internal map, if you want.
Yeah.
And a lot of people carry that map with them forever after, and it becomes more and more embedded in who they are, and it eventually becomes who they think they are.
You just really address some of the key topics in Moshe's book, Awareness Through Movement. The first few chapters in that book are really describing in detail what you just talked about, which is, we do develop and we develop pretty naturally for a while. And then we have to conform to social rules and social guidelines. We go to school, we have to learn how to inhibit ourselves to sit still and be good boys and girls and, achieve and do all this stuff. So all this stuff gets layered on, which really takes us away from who we are.
Yeah.
And like you said, people get to a point where they don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And one of the things Feldenkrais talked about was that this work will restore people to their I don't know, how do you say it, their human dignity, to make them fully human, and to complete their maturation. So they become fully human, fully mature, people.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
And it seems so lovely that you, as opposed to other, for example, if somebody had, for example, an emotional problem that was rooted in some experience in the past, you could actually tackle it indirectly through the Feldenkrais system without having to actually re-engage with all that stuff perhaps in the past. But naturally it might emerge.
Yeah, to a degree, I would say. I wouldn't say that, all emotional traumas or issues will just resolve on their own through doing Feldenkrais lessons. But a lot can, and a lot of the habits that have formed as a result of, somebody having trauma or having challenges early in their life, as well as, physical trauma, those things can resolve. And, it's also good to get some counseling along the way sometimes too, and just talk to somebody and have that emotional and psychological support. But it addresses in a very interesting way emotions. And I'll tell you this quote from Moshe from Body and Mature Behavior, that without movement, without muscular contractions, there are no expression of emotions. So the feelings we have, the expression of those feelings, are subtle and sometimes not so subtle, contractions of muscles that give us that feeling of anxiety, anger, happiness, joy. And they're very clear postures, very clear sets of movements that go along with those different emotional states.
Yeah.
And he goes on to talk about how emotions are one of the key things that shape our posture as well. Because emotions are things that we experience through time, right? They go through a long period of time, through many different contexts. And so there are muscular contractions that go along with those, and those begin to shape our posture. So myself as a young man had a great deal of anxiety, and I had a posture that was very much rounded forward, and my neck was stuck out, and there was really nothing I could do about it. So I started doing Feldenkrais lessons, and then that started to change. And the patterns of anxiety started to change. And then I could actually start to learn to sense and work with that.
Yeah. In today's world where we're bombarded by information, a lot of people are sitting at a desk 9 to 5 and longer. And by the end of the day, through not having any particular emotional problem, but they end up completely wired and stressed and their body tight. So I'm imagining that Feldenkrais will be a superb way of releasing that.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, and you working at a desk and you're bombarded with all this information, and there are certain postures or certain ways of sitting, moving, organizing yourself for that kind of thinking, for that kind of processing, for that kind of interaction with your computer or whatever you're doing, that, over, 6, 8, 10 hours during a day is going to have an impact on you. Your nervous system starts to anticipate, okay, we're going to be doing this again and again and again. And so it just kind of keeps that in play, so that those habits really start to form and become more cemented. Feldenkrais lessons are a great complement to that, in that they can really help you reset, come back to a more balanced, neutral place from which you can move.
Yeah.
I would add another thing about posture. Moshe's definition of posture is the ability to move in any direction without preparation.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's going to vary from context to context, right?
Yeah, I can see where that comes from in the martial arts.
There
Origin.
you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. He called it acture. He didn't like the word posture because it's too static.
Right.
It becomes a thing to which people think they need to help themselves rigidly.
Yeah.
And acture, he thought, was a much better term for it because it assumes some action. You're going to move in some way. We're always moving in some way anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Is there a simple practice that you could share with our listeners that they could try perhaps after our interview, just to give them a little taste of?
Well, probably the easiest thing to do would be, I think if you have a link to a free ebook that I wrote and I published.
Yeah.
I could just easily go and sign up for my email list and download that ebook, and it guides them through a very simple lesson which addresses tension in the neck, shoulders, upper back, and also introduces some very fundamental ideas about the Feldenkrais method, how we approach a lesson, and what is a Feldenkrais lesson. And that would be the most simple way for somebody to get the direct experience of it.
We'll put the link under your interview so that the people can dive into that.
Great, yeah. And if they like to be guided through a lesson, I have a lot of just individual lessons that I published on my website. Mm-hmm. And people can go there, they can read the description. A lot of them are highly reviewed. So they're inexpensive too, they're $9 each. So it's a really nice way to get into having an experience of the Feldenkrais method. Yeah. And really finding out what's it about, how does it feel, how do you do a lesson, and what are the benefits of it subjectively. We talked about it objectively. The subjective experience of the method is a whole other experience. Yeah, yeah.
Is that, unfortunately, we're coming to a close of our chat. Is there one thing that you'd like our listeners to take away from our chat today?
Well, the power and effectiveness of this work, cannot be understated. It is difficult to describe in words. I think I do a fairly good job at it. It is the subjective experience of the work that really opens doors, opens eyes, opens the mind, and helps you to be more of who you want to be and achieve more of what you want to achieve in life. And many people walk through the door because they have pain, they have a difficulty in life with which they're working, and it's very helpful with that. Beyond that, it is a tool for really improving oneself and going beyond just average and going towards really above average for yourself. What you can do so you can become more fully human, more mature, and a more complete person to live a more complete, satisfying life.
Listen, thank you so much, Al, for a fantastic chat. Not only for myself, but I know that the listeners will get immense value from it. And
thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love talking about the work. It's a significant, important part of my life. It continues to fascinate me even after 20 years. And we'll do so for another 20 years.
Well, let's hope for that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again. And that's it for today, folks. But stay tuned for another fantastic interview coming your way tomorrow.